With the new Avatar show having been announced and the synopsis having been revealed, many Korra haters, including myself, have realized this is our chance to continue preaching the philosophy that Avatar Korra is the worst Avatar. Korra being the worst Avatar has been a belief since before The Legend of Korra even released. In the beginning, it was just a blind hatred driven by the fact that everyone rightfully thinks Aang is the GOAT, and that blind hatred persisted until Korra actually started doing things. From the moment that she was shown, it was very clear that Korra was going to be a big departure from Aang in every aspect. Where Aang was measured and cool-headed, Korra could never keep her cool. Where Aang was constantly doubtful of himself despite being able to do amazing things, Korra was constantly full of herself, despite her not really being able to back it up most of the time. Where Aang was actually winning his fights, Korra was losing in the Avatar state. Many people believe that just because Korra is the worst Avatar, it also means that she never did anything good. I disagree with this. I want to use this video as a soapbox to actually, realistically discuss why Korra is the worst Avatar. Before I dive in that water, I'm closing my eyes. Look at me now, I done turned to a man. People don't like Aang just because he was a good fighter. People like Aang because of who he was. He was a kid who had so much doubt in himself and a lot of guilt in himself, and despite all of that self-doubt and all of that guilt, Aang worked hard with everything against him to become a fully realized Avatar and end the 100-Year War. People like Aang because he was more down to earth and more relatable. People dislike Korra because she had everything handed to her and was still losing, which in of itself is not an issue, but it's the fact that she would lose and then still be arrogant and never change anything. If she was just losing, that's fine. Everyone loses fights. Aang lost to Azula, Roku lost to Sozin. Being the Avatar doesn't mean you're unbeatable. You can lose fights and still be dope. But only Korra was losing her fights and then getting upset at the people trying to help her because she thought she knew better. Korra's character, despite being incredibly frustrating to watch, was actually very well written. Huh? I hear you ask? But Qloudy, wasn't this video about how Korra is a B-word and terrible and bad and stupid? No. This is a video on why Korra is the worst Avatar, not why Korra is a bad character, because that video premise doesn't make sense. Korra's character, despite all of the things that annoyed and frustrated me, made complete sense. This was a girl who was capable of bending 3 elements by the time she was like 5. She spent her whole life being trained and doted on by the White Lotus and occasionally Tenzin, and she was an Avatar in an era where there really wasn't shit going on. It's not a surprise she was overeager and full of herself. She was being trained to fight demons and shit, and then she gets to Republic City and she's beefing with street gangs. It's like if the Punisher got a job as a hall monitor. The skill to necessity ratio was not the same as what Aang was going through. And people forget, despite how childish she was at times, Aang was an airbending master who studied and understood airbender philosophy and techniques from the time he was a kid. He beat all the enemies that got put in front of him, but he beat them his way as an air nomad, which was a necessity for him because his people had been exterminated. Korra didn't have that level of drive behind her, and as the years passed since Aang's death and Korra's birth, the stories of the gang defeating the Fire Nation essentially got diluted into Aang beat them up and then everything ended, which makes sense because as time passes, stories begin to get diluted and information gets lost until the entire point gets missing. But this dilution of what Aang and his crew did was likely the reason that Korra was so ready to scrap at all times, because what she understood as far as being the Avatar is that the Avatar beats up bad guys. But obviously over the course of her story, she understands the truth of her title and becomes a fully realized Avatar. But that doesn't change the fact that her character, almost the entire show, was very infuriating to watch, and let's be honest, made some terrible choices. I didn't know if I wanted to dedicate a whole chapter to this particular topic of conversation, but it's actually really important. So while we're talking about Nickelodeon cartoons, let's discuss misogyny real quick. A large chunk of the discussion about Korra being the worst Avatar has always been cited as being rooted in misogyny, which is a fair concern. I'm not an idiot. This is the internet, bro. Let's not act like every criticism of a female character is rooted in honesty. A lot of these guys just hate women. And I'm not qualified to discuss the ins and outs of internet misogyny, but the reality of the matter is despite very real criticisms of Korra, a minority of people levy those criticisms, and others, not because they're warranted or true, but because she's a girl. However, with that being said, on average, people don't criticize Korra because she's a girl. They criticize her because she does stupid shit. Imagine for a moment that you're grocery shopping. When suddenly your phone buzzes, you check your phone and your friend has sent you a really funny message, and you smile at the message because you're a human with emotions. And then suddenly, because you smiled, Ko the face stealer shows up and he eats you. You know who you can blame for that? Avatar Korra. I'm gonna be honest. Korra's done a lot of great stuff. Defeating Amon and the Equalists, defeating Unalaq and Vaatu, defeating the Red Lotus and Kuvira. But in a lot of these books where she defeats the final villain, she almost always does something really bad that on occasion overshadows her achievements. In book 1, it was super minuscule. She was just moving really weird in the beginning, but you can probably just chalk that up to her having lived in an igloo for her entire life and suddenly being in the Bronx. But in book 2, it was way worse. She spent almost the entire season making problems with her friends and family who were really just trying to help her, and not to mention the fact that she trusted shady-ass Uncle Locke over her dad, Tenzin, and her friends, which eventually leads to her losing her connection to the previous avatars. And a lot of people like to say, oh, but she revived the Air Nation. Not really. That just happened by chance. She was just a lucky accident. You can't give her credit for that. However, you do have to give her a lot of credit because in book 3, she goes out with everybody to find the new airbenders and actually revive Airbender society, which was dope. Actually, to be honest, book 3, she didn't do anything wrong. She was dope in book 3, which is probably why that's my favorite season of the show. So far, most of the stuff Korra's done wrong has been pretty whatever. Sure, she intimidated some non-benders, did some property damage, destroyed the previous avatar cycle, but what's a little spiritual destruction between friends? The main bad thing that Korra did, the thing that in my opinion cemented her as the worst avatar, is her leaving the spirit portals open. The spirit portals are the gateway from the spirit world to the material world, and with them open, humans and spirits can just drop in on each other with no issue. But you're probably thinking to yourself, Qloudy, the avatar is the bridge between the spirit and material worlds. Obviously this was done for that reason. Yeah, you idiot. The bridge between the spirit and material world. A bridge connects two separate places. What Korra did was not act as a bridge. Korra dropped them bitches on top of each other and called it a day. There have been so many different avatars over the years. Many good, lot bad, and out of all that time that they have been operating, none of them were ever like, man, I gotta open these spirit portals. I understand that Korra's intention wasn't to get people vaporized by Heibai's spirit beam, but if we're looking at the summary for the new show, it seems like the spirit portal shit wasn't that good idea. I do want to make it clear that every avatar has made tremendous mistakes. I don't want people to think that I'm saying Korra is the first avatar to do anything wrong. Absolutely not. But she is the only avatar that dropped Sukuna in Ba Sing Se. Have you guys seen the summary for the new show? I have. And from what I understood from that summary, Korra turned this shit into the Forest of Death. We don't even need avatars anymore. We need Hashiras. I don't think people understand how bad it is that spirits and humans are just pulling up on each other. Historically, humans have not been kind to spirits, and because of that, there are a lot of hostile spirits. Like Ko, like Heibai sometimes, like Wan Shi Tong. Korra having the spirit portals open made it so that it was easier for humans to attack and take advantage of spirits, and on the flip side, it gave malicious spirits a free meal. Judging by the summary of the new show, it's extremely fair to assume that Korra's choice to keep the portals open resulted in many deaths of both human and spirits, which makes sense because Korra dropped the upper moons in Republic City. No matter what way you look at it, from all the main avatars that we have knowledge of, the only avatar who did anything as close as bad as Korra was Roku. And nobody denies Roku was a trash avatar. But I do want to point out that despite Roku being the reason the 100-Year War happened, people were still waiting for Aang to come back. People were in need of a new avatar and they wanted one. But in the new show, they say that being the avatar means you're looked at as a destroyer by both spirits and humans. So it's not looking too good. Korra's opening of the spirit portals and the consequences they brought is not only the worst thing she ever did, even worse than losing connection to the past avatars, but it probably cemented her as the worst avatar in history. Korra is the worst avatar. Not because she's a woman, not because she's annoying, not because she loses fights, not because she's a homie hopper, not because she's annoying. Did I mention she's annoying? but because she's done things that cement her as the worst. Constantly choosing not to work with the people who love and want the best for you because you think you know better, losing connection to hundreds, if not thousands of years of past knowledge with the previous Avatar cycle, and most importantly, dropping the Phantom Troop in Ba Sing Se. It needs to be reiterated that Korra is not a bad character. Her writing fits perfectly for the world of Legend of Korra, and her actions and attitude are a direct result of the world of Legend of Korra. Korra isn't a bad character. She's just a bad avatar, but that doesn't mean she never did anything right. She did a bunch of things right and saved the day a bunch of times, but unfortunately, the bad she did outweighed her good. And at the end of the day, all we can really say is that this new avatar is living on nightmare difficulty.